So, I've been married to Eileen for 15 years now. We've got two great kids, still young and full of life. I'm a pretty straightforward guy, the type who says what he means and isn't big on nonsense. If there's one thing I've always believed in, it's that honesty and loyalty are at the heart of any good marriage. I try to treat Eileen like the queen she is, always encouraging her to follow her dreams and be herself. She's a stunning woman, both inside and out. People are drawn to her naturally. She has that graceful way of moving through life that makes everyone turn their heads when she walks by. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a bit jealous sometimes. It's like this little ache that pops up out of nowhere, especially when I see other men noticing her. I know it's my own issue, and I've worked hard to keep it in check over the years. I don't want to be the guy who's insecure about his wife's beauty and charm. But a couple of times, it got to the point where I had to step in. Once, we were out for dinner, just the two of us, enjoying a rare evening without the kids. Some guy decided he'd try his luck, walking right up to her like I wasn't even there, and tried to pull her onto the dance floor. I stepped in right away. He didn't know what hit him, and he got the message loud and clear. We left shortly after, but Eileen and I both knew that things like that didn't sit well with me. Lately, though, things have felt different. Eileen's been acting strange, and there's no better way to put it. She's dressing differently, like she's put more thought into her outfits and makeup than she used to. She's also been going out more often, saying it's work-related or just an extra meeting here and there. At first, I didn't want to overthink it. She's a social person, and she's good at what she does, so more meetings and networking events aren't out of the ordinary. But these days, she's out late more often, and there's this layer of secrecy about her that wasn't there before. She always has an excuse ready, too, almost like she's been rehearsing them. One name kept popping up in her stories, her new boss, Clyde. She'd mention him here and there, talk about how he's so good at building connections or how he's got a modern approach to business. I try not to think too much of it, but then I noticed she'd be texting late at night, and when I'd ask who it was, she'd say it was Clyde, checking in about some project. A project at 11 at night? I wasn't buying it. Clyde's got that slick, smooth-talking salesman vibe, the kind that puts my guard up instantly. After a few more weeks of this behavior, my gut feeling only grew stronger. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps to conclusions, but I also believe in trusting your instincts. I had to know for sure, so I decided to hire a private investigator to keep an eye on her. Part of me felt like I was betraying her trust, but at the same time, I couldn't live in doubt either. I told myself if there was nothing to find, then I'd just be relieved. I had to know the truth, one way or the other. A couple of weeks later, the investigator came back with the evidence, photos, videos, the works. It was like my worst fears were laid out in front of me. There she was, with Clyde, looking like they were more than just co-workers. The investigator didn't hold back, and seeing everything in black and white hit me like a freight train. My stomach dropped. I was furious and heartbroken all at once. I'd given this woman everything, my trust, my loyalty, my love. How could she betray our family like this? As I sat with those photos and videos in my hands, I felt an anger rising up that I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't something I could just let go. I couldn't let her walk away from this without facing the consequences. So, I started planning a little surprise, something to give them both a taste of what betrayal feels like. I knew I had to be careful and think things through. This wasn't just about anger. It was about justice, about making sure they understood the weight of their actions. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. I'd planned everything down to the last detail. There was no room for error. I had a guy lined up, ready to deliver the evidence just when I needed it. I got to the restaurant early and reserved a private table, ensuring the setting would be intimate and uninterrupted. Eileen thought I was out of town. She'd probably laughed to herself about how easily I could be deceived. But she was wrong. I was a step ahead. When she and Clyde finally showed up, they walked in as if they were on some kind of romantic getaway. I watched from my vantage point near the back, and there she was, dressed to the nines, makeup flawless, hair styled in a way she hadn't done in years, at least not for me. She looked radiant, and the sight twisted my stomach. I couldn't help but wonder when she stopped trying like that for me, when things started to shift without me noticing. But tonight wasn't the time for regrets or second-guessing. Tonight was for revelation. Once they were seated, Leaning close and speaking softly, I made my move. I walked over, pulled up a chair, and joined them at the table. Eileen froze, her hand gripping her glass mid-sip. Clyde, on the other hand, just sat there, slack-jawed, looking like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Evening, Eileen," I said with a polite nod. "Looks like you're enjoying yourself." "Oh, hi," she stammered, clearly rattled. I didn't expect to see you here. I thought you were out of town." "Yeah, well, plans changed," I replied, taking a seat and casually pouring myself some water. "Figured I'd join the party." I raised my glass, fixing my eyes on Clyde. "To new beginnings and unexpected surprises," I said with a forced smile. The color had drained from Eileen's face, and I could see her trying to come up with something, anything, to cover her tracks. But I wasn't going to give her the chance. I turned my attention to Clyde, who was now fidgeting, pulling at his collar. "So, Clyde," I said slowly, "what's the secret to a happy marriage?" "It's honesty and trust, wouldn't you say?" Clyde swallowed hard. Yeah, absolutely," he replied, voice shaky. "Those are the foundations of a strong relationship." I nodded, letting the silence hang in the air before continuing. "Couldn't agree more. Eileen and I have always built our relationship on honesty. I think it's the only way to make it last." Eileen's face was tight with fear, her eyes wide as she realized the conversation was spiraling out of her control. I took a deep breath and leaned back, then pulled a folder from my bag and placed it squarely on the table. "There's something you should know, Clyde," I said, patting the folder. "Eileen and I have our own way of dealing with betrayal." Without breaking eye contact, I opened the folder and spread the evidence before them. Photos, time-stamped text messages, videos. The full display of their affair was laid out right there, visible under the dim glow of the restaurant's lights. Eileen's eyes went wide with horror, and Clyde turned white as a sheet. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. "I've been watching the two of you," I said calmly. "Every little move, every text, every secret meeting. I know it all." At that, Eileen's composure finally cracked. She started crying, begging me to forgive her, whispering that it was all a mistake, that it meant nothing. Clyde sat there sweating bullets, realizing he'd stepped right into a trap. He shifted uncomfortably, glancing around as though searching for an escape. "It's too late, Eileen," I told her, my voice steady. "You've shattered any trust we had left. You've destroyed what we built for our family. And I won't just let it slide." I pulled out the divorce papers I'd brought with me and set them in front of her. "Sign these," I said, "and don't expect leniency. I'll make sure you pay for every bit of damage you've done." Eileen looked at me, defeated, tears streaming down her face. She knew there was no coming back from this, no way to talk her way out. Clyde, though, seemed to be struggling to wrap his head around it all, his face a mix of shock and regret. But any pity I might have felt for either of them was buried deep under a wave of satisfaction. After giving them a final look, I pushed back my chair and walked out of the restaurant, leaving them to sit in the wreckage of what they'd created. The cool night air hit me as I stepped outside, and I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. It was a bitter victory, no doubt, but it was a necessary one. I'd taken back control, made them face the truth, and ensured they'd pay the price for what they'd done. And as painful as it all was, for the first time in weeks, I finally felt a small sense of closure. I watched Eileen sign the divorce papers, her hand trembling as she scrawled her name across the line. The once confident, vivacious woman I'd married looked hollow, her spirit worn down. As she finished signing, she slid the papers back to me, barely able to meet my eyes. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity for her, a shadow of the love we once had, but it quickly vanished as the reality of her betrayal settled back in. Eileen had brought this upon herself, and we both knew it. Without a word, I folded the papers and carefully slipped off my wedding ring. I felt the weight of it one last time before dropping it straight into her half-full wine glass. The ring sank with a soft plink, settling at the bottom, shimmering under the restaurant lights. It was my silent message to her, a final symbol of what had been, now discarded. I looked across the table at Clyde, who looked just as shattered and guilt-ridden as Eileen. I leaned toward him and said, "Congratulations. She's yours now. But remember, you messed with the wrong guy." He shifted uncomfortably, and Eileen's eyes fell back to the table, avoiding both our gazes. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and left the restaurant, stepping into the cool night air. A strange feeling of relief washed over me, one that I hadn't expected. It was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest, the heavy burden of betrayal finally freed. I'd faced the worst of it, and I'd come out on the other side, maybe not unscathed but certainly resolved. As I drove home, I couldn't escape the hollow feeling gnawing at me. The relief was there, yes, but there was an emptiness too, one that settled in and refused to leave. My life, my family, had been torn apart in an instant. The home I'd worked so hard to build, the trust one had given so freely. It was all shattered, and now I was left with the pieces. I gripped the wheel tighter, trying to steady myself, telling myself I could rebuild, but deep down, I knew it would be a long, painful road ahead. The next few weeks drifted by in a blur of routine. I threw myself into my work, trying to stay busy, to avoid dwelling too long on everything I'd lost. But what kept me going most were my kids. They were my anchor, my reason for keeping my head up and moving forward. They didn't fully understand what had happened, and I made sure to shield them from as much of the pain as I could. With them, I was calm, patient, doing my best to be the dad they deserved, making sure they knew they were loved and that, no matter what, I'd always be there for them. Eileen, meanwhile, seemed to be struggling. She tried to reach out a couple of times, probably thinking there was still some chance of redemption or closure, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. I'd given her the life she'd claimed to want, and she'd thrown it away. Now she was alone, trying to pick up her own pieces, heartbroken and without the family she once had. It wasn't easy for me to ignore her, but I reminded myself that forgiveness couldn't change what she'd done. On a few occasions, I'd drive past the old house, the one we'd lived in together, now eerily quiet, void of the laughter and life it once held. I could only imagine what it was like for her in there, surrounded by memories and regrets, forced to confront what she'd lost. But that was her path to walk. My focus had to be on the future and on healing, both for me and for my kids. Slowly, I began to believe that time would indeed heal all wounds, even if it felt impossible in the moment. Each day, I tried to take things one step at a time, knowing that the pain would lessen eventually. The scars would remain, a reminder of the lesson I'd learned, but with each passing day, I felt a little stronger, a little more certain that I could rebuild my life. For now, though, the wounds were still raw. Some days, the weight of the betrayal came rushing back, the memories stinging like fresh cuts. But I knew I had to move forward. This ordeal had made me tougher, and perhaps wiser, even though it had cost me dearly. The lesson Eileen and Clyde had taught me would stick with me for life. Trust is a precious gift, one that should never be taken for granted or tossed aside. And so, I promised myself, as I took those first steps toward healing, that I'd remember this. In time, I would rebuild, stronger and more mindful of who I let into my life. And while the road would be long, I knew deep down I would make it through, piece by piece, day by day. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Eileen and I had both tried to move on with our lives in the wake of the upheaval that had shaken our world. I poured my energy into my work, immersing myself in projects that demanded my full attention. It was a distraction, one that allowed me to avoid confronting the emotional wreckage left in the aftermath of our separation. My children were my guiding light during this tumultuous time. I wanted to be the steady anchor they needed, a strong presence in their lives amidst the chaos. Every moment spent with them felt like a precious gift, a reminder of what truly mattered. Eileen, on the other hand, seemed to be struggling immensely. The weight of her choices bore heavily on her shoulders, and I could see from afar how she wrestled with the consequences of her actions. It pained me to learn that she had lost her job, her home, and, most devastatingly, her family. The life we had built together was now a distant memory, replaced by a harsh reality that I knew all too well. Despite everything that had transpired, a part of me still felt sympathy for her. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. I glanced at the screen and felt my heart drop as I recognized Eileen's name. She sounded desperate on the other end, her voice shaky and filled with emotion. "Andrew, I'm at rock bottom," she said, her words laced with urgency. "I really need your help." I hesitated, caught off guard by the vulnerability in her voice. After everything, could I really bring myself to help the woman who had shattered my world? In that moment of indecision, I remembered my children, their laughter, and the love they gave me unconditionally. I realized that my role as a father extended beyond my immediate family. It included empathy for others, even those who had hurt me. So, against my better judgment, I agreed to meet with her. We chose a small coffee shop on the edge of town, a neutral ground, filled with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. When I walked in, my heart sank at the sight of Eileen. She looked frail and broken, her once vibrant spirit dimmed to a shadow of what it had been. Her face was drawn, and her eyes, usually filled with a spark of life, were now clouded with regret. "Eileen," I said softly as I took a seat across from her. She looked up, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I didn't know you were struggling this much." "I'm sorry, Andrew," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "I know I messed everything up. I've been in such a dark place. I made terrible decisions, and I've lost everything that mattered to me." Her vulnerability struck a chord within me. I could see the genuine remorse in her eyes, and for a moment, the walls I had built around my heart began to crumble. But the memories of our past, the betrayal, the pain, flooded back to me, reminding me of why I had kept my distance. "Eileen," I began, choosing my words carefully. "I can't forget what happened. You hurt me deeply. But if you truly want to change, I'm willing to help you." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I will do whatever it takes," she promised. "I just want a chance to make things right." Over the next few months, I became an unexpected ally in Eileen's journey to rebuild her life. I helped her find a job, leveraging my connections to get her an interview at a local company. I assisted her in finding a small apartment, nothing extravagant, but it was a start. It felt surreal to be taking these steps with her, but I held on to the hope that redemption was possible. Encouraging her to seek therapy was a crucial step. Eileen needed to confront her demons, to understand the choices that had led her down such a dark path. I could see her starting to heal, bit by bit. Slowly but surely, she began to regain her confidence. I was proud of her progress. It felt good to see her striving for a better future. As the months passed, our relationship underwent an unexpected transformation. What started as a tense and cautious partnership gradually blossomed into a friendship. We shared laughter and stories over coffee, reminiscing about the good times we once had. There were still echoes of our past, but we both recognized that we had changed. It was as if we were building a new foundation, one based on mutual respect and understanding. Eventually, that friendship evolved into something deeper. We were careful not to rush into anything, aware of the fragility of our situation. With each passing day, we took our time, allowing our bond to strengthen naturally. I found myself drawn to her resilience, her determination to rise from the ashes of her past. Our love story was not without its challenges. There were days when the shadows of our history threatened to resurface, moments when the wounds felt fresh again. Yet, we leaned on each other, determined to learn from our mistakes. Eileen had shown immense growth, and I felt grateful for the opportunity to witness her transformation. We were both determined to make our relationship work, and this time, it felt different. I knew that trust, once broken, could take time to mend, but we were committed to the journey ahead. Piece by piece, we were reconstructing our lives, not just as individuals, but as partners who had faced adversity and emerged stronger together. Eileen and I stood in front of the small chapel, the sunlight filtering through the trees, casting soft shadows on the ground. This time, it was just the two of us, a quiet ceremony to mark our renewed commitment to each other. The air was thick with the weight of our past, yet it was also filled with hope for a new beginning. After all we had been through, we understood the significance of this moment. It was a chance to rewrite our story. Our journey to this point hadn't been easy. The scars from our past lingered, but instead of allowing them to drive us apart, We chose to let them guide us toward a stronger bond. We were more cautious this time, fully aware of the fragility of love and trust. Each step we took felt deliberate, as if we were treading carefully over fragile ground, determined not to repeat the mistakes that had once driven us apart. Life after our remarriage was filled with its own set of challenges. The realities of daily life often tested our resolve. We faced moments of doubt, and there were times when the shadows of our previous hurt threatened to creep back in. However, we learned to communicate openly and honestly, something we hadn't fully mastered in our first marriage. No longer were we afraid to voice our fears and insecurities. We shared our thoughts, discussing not only the good moments but also the hard ones. This newfound openness forged a deeper understanding between us. Forgiveness became another pillar of our relationship. In the beginning, it was difficult. I often found myself revisiting the pain Eileen had caused me, struggling to let go of the anger and hurt. But with each passing day, I realized that clinging to the past only hindered our growth. Eileen, too, was committed to making amends for her past mistakes. We learned to forgive and, equally important, to forget. It wasn't about erasing the past, but rather about acknowledging it and choosing to move forward together. One evening, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I turned to Eileen. "Do you remember how far we've come?" I asked. Her eyes sparkled in the twilight as she smiled, and for a moment, it felt as if the weight of our history had lifted, leaving only the love we had fought to reclaim. Our shared moments became sacred. We learned to cherish every second we had together, celebrating the little victories, like cooking dinner side by side, taking long walks in the park, or simply enjoying a quiet evening at home. The mundane moments, once overlooked, transformed into precious memories that stitched our lives together. Years passed, and we often reflected on our journey with gratitude. We had survived the storm, emerging stronger and more resilient than before. Our love was no longer just a flicker. It burned bright, fueled by understanding and mutual respect. We had each faced our demons and learned from them, which only deepened our connection. Our story became a testament to the power of forgiveness and the enduring nature of love. We embraced the importance of second chances, not just in our relationship but in life itself. The struggles we had faced became our foundation, reminding us that love is not only about joy and laughter, but also about facing challenges together and growing from them. As I held Eileen's hand, I knew that we had built something beautiful, a relationship grounded in trust and affection, stronger than it had ever been before. Our journey was ongoing, and while we would undoubtedly face new challenges, we now had the tools to navigate them together. Looking into Eileen's eyes, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. No longer were we just two individuals trying to figure out our way. We were partners, committed to facing the world together. We had been given a second chance, and this time, we were determined to make it count.